Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of The Quarterdeck. This week, we're going to continue to take a look at our reading of our book, With the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, and we're going to look at the Recon Battalion and RCT-1 as they progress through their assault from Kuwait into Iraq and what their mission was and what they were capable of accomplishing as they made their way through all the way into Baghdad. In our hero highlights this week, we take a look at the heroic story of Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Jeremiah McCarthy, United States Marine Corps.
Drop and give me 25. I'm the gunny.
It's time for the gunning. It's time.
The Quarterdeck. Lights. Get online right now. You got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, my bunch of knuckle-dragging, beer-drinking, hard-charging devil dogs. You're listening to The Quarterdeck. I am your host, Miguel, the Gunny Signs.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Now that we're only 16 days away from Christmas, I can't help myself but to actually think back of how many Christmases, how many New Year's, how many holidays were actually spent away from home, deployed either in Iraq or Afghanistan or on a ship floating across the Pacific Ocean somewhere. So many memories of those happen. I think the last one that I have a memory of when I was actually deployed was just my last deployment, which was in Afghanistan. When my son was born, we were down there still in Afghanistan in Fobs-Bougie, down there in the Kajaki district of Afghanistan. And I remember I stayed up all night long waiting for me to hear the news that my son was finally going to be born, because the plan that we had worked out, that I had spoken with my sister-in-law about, was that she was going to either call me on FaceTime or something to call me so that way I could be there in the delivery room during that time and actually just be able to watch the birth of my son. However, as we have it, technological issues were not in our favor that day, and I was not able to find out. I think the only way that I really found out that he was actually born was because she posted a post on Facebook. And as soon as she did that, then I tried to call and finally contacted them, and they told me yes, that he was born. And then that is when I finally had the opportunity to actually look at his face and see him for the very first time. Was when he was still down there in the room and my wife was down there because she had to recover because he was such a huge baby that she had to have a C-section. So she had him there in California while I was down there in Afghanistan. And, looking back at those times and the things that we as service members we miss so many things because of our training or deployments or anything like that. And to me, this was by far the biggest thing that I had missed, because we had just recently gotten married, months before I deployed and headed out there to Afghanistan. And now my son was being born, and heck, I wasn't even there to be able to see him be born or anything like that. And it was special because, I have two girls, and this was the boy. This was the boy that I've been waiting for, and finally I had my son, and I missed it. So it is very, very important for us to remember during this time, all those service members that are still gone, they're still deployed right now, and they're not going to be able to spend this time with their family. So keep them in your prayers, make sure that you think about them, and remember that they are Marines everywhere throughout the world right now that are just simply not home, and they're not going to be able to spend it with their family. Now, it's because of that I want to take a look at and remember, because especially during this holiday, there are so many things that are remembered, whether it is a bedtime story the night before Christmas or anything like that, or holiday movies, especially for me. Elf. We watched Elf, and that is one of the most hilarious Christmas movies that there is. And, there's so much debate. Is Die Hard really a Christmas movie? In my opinion, I want to say yes. It occurred during Christmas, and I don't care if he was out there fighting and killing enemy. on Christmas Eve, but to me, it still is a Christmas movie, and nobody's going to take that away from me. But what I want to actually focus on is that there are so many people out there that do poetry and all that stuff regarding everything to deal with the military or just family in general. And James M. Schmidt in 1987 wrote a poem called "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And this is the Marine Corps version of what he wrote. And I want to take the opportunity and share this with you guys. "'Twas the night before Christmas. He lived all alone in a one-bedroom house made of plaster and stone. I had come down the chimney with presents to give and to see just who in this home did live. As I looked all about, a strange sight I did see. No tinsel, no presents, not even a tree. No stocking by the fire, just boots filled with sand. On the wall hung pictures of a far distant land. With medals and badges, awards of all kind, a sobering thought soon came to my mind. For this house was different, unlike any I'd seen. This was the home of a U.S. Marine. I'd heard stories about them. I had to see more. So I walked down the hall and pushed open the door. And there he lay sleeping, silent, alone, curled up on the floor in his one-bedroom home. He seemed so gentle, his face so serene. Not how I pictured a U.S. Marine. Was this the hero of whom I just read? Curled up in his poncho, a floor for his bed. His head was clean-shaven, his weathered face tan. I soon understood this was more than a man. For I realized the families that I saw that night owed their lives to these men who were willing to fight. Soon around the nation the children would play, and grown-ups would celebrate on a bright Christmas day. They all enjoyed freedom each month and all year because of Marines like this one lying here. I couldn't help wonder how many lay alone on a cold Christmas Eve in the land far from home. Just the very thought brought a tear to my eye. I dropped to my knees and I started to cry. He must have awoken, for I heard a rough voice. "Santa, don't cry. This life is my choice. I fight for freedom. I don't ask for more. My life is my God, my country, my core." With that, he rolled over and drifted off into sleep. I couldn't control it. I continued to weep. I watched him for hours, so silent and still. I noticed he shivered from the cold night's chill. So I took off my jacket, the one made of red, and covered this Marine from his toes to his head. Then I put on his t-shirt of scarlet and gold, with an eagle, a globe, and an anchor embossed so bold. And although it barely fit me, I began to swell with pride. And for one shining moment, I was a Marine Corps deep inside. I didn't want to leave him so quiet in the night, this guardian of honor so willing to fight. But half asleep, he rolled over, in a voice clean and pure. He said, "Carry on, Santa. It's Christmas Day, all secure." One look at my watch and I knew he was right. Merry Christmas, my friend. Semper Fi, and good night. So this is just one of those mini poems that every single year I take a look at this, and it's not almost like every year it happens to get better and better every year, because they are so right. The way that he wrote this poem makes so much sense because it is true. Now, in the Marine Corps, there is a tradition that whenever they have Christmas parties or anything like that for a unit function, you know, during Christmas, Santa Claus always comes and gives toys to the kids and so forth. But in the Marine Corps, there is Gunny Claus. That's correct, a gunnery sergeant, Santa Claus. That he comes down there and he sits there and talks to the kids, all the Marine Corps kids that are down there, and he gives them presents and everything. And it's just a good tradition. And remember, I can remember my son was like 1, getting ready to go on 2 when we were still down there in Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. and we had our Christmas party, and they had gunny claws that came down to the party. And it was kind of weird because the way he looked at him, no different at all. And my son was always scared of Santa Claus, so he didn't want to sit on his lap and get those pictures that we got every year. But for whatever reason, I remember that he sat on Gunny Claus's lap and didn't make a sound. So it was weird, but I'm glad that he did, and I'm glad that we were able to share in that tradition of Gunny Claus, especially since since 95 I have retired, and it's been very, very few Marine families that we kind of meet here where we live now in Arizona. So it's a lot easier for us to remember those events and everything that we did. But let's always remember that it's very, very important for us to always remember those that are deployed and enjoy this time for what it is. Enjoy it for what it is, that it's time for you to be able to spend with your family and enjoy the time that you have here. Now, there are many, many service members that are out there that certain tragic events occur during these times and these holidays, and sometimes it can be difficult. It can be difficult to actually enjoy the time here with the family, but we also got to remember that we have to understand how to cope with these kind of situations, and that's one of the things that's taken me years and years to understand, but eventually it's going to get better. And besides, I need a good kick in the ass every once in a while. My wife is very, very quick to give me one for me to understand that, hey, this is time to spend with your family and time to enjoy it here. So for that, I thank her. And here is me, Gunny, wishing everybody a Merry, Merry Christmas. And since this week will be our last podcast here for the year, and we're going to pick back up at the beginning of the year in January. So I want to take the opportunity to wish you guys a Merry Christmas. And always remember, everybody that's deployed out there, think about them, send them a prayer, and enjoy this time with your family. Are you looking for a photographer who can capture the most important moments in your life? Look no further than Miguel Saenz Photography. Miguel Saenz is an award-winning photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty and emotions of weddings, family portraits, and special events. With years of experience and a creative eye, Miguel Saenz will create stunning images that you'll treasure for years to come. Whether you're looking for a traditional wedding album, a unique family portrait, or a professional headshot for your business, Miguel Saenz Photography has the expertise to bring your vision to life. From the initial consultation to the final product, Miguel Saenz will work with you every step of the way to ensure that your images reflect your unique style and personality. Don't settle for mediocre photographs that simply document an event. Trust Miguel Saenz Photography to create timeless images that capture the essence of your special moments. Book your session today and experience the magic of Miguel Saenz Photography. Visit Miguel Saenz Photography online at miguelsaenzphotography.com to see examples of his work and schedule your appointment today.
What we're gonna do right here is go back, way back into time.
As we found out last week, the division is making their way throughout Iraq and making their way all the way into Baghdad. Now that they have the oil fields secure, the division is going to continue to progress down there. And this week, we're going to go ahead and continue with that and see exactly what Recon Battalion and RCT-1 was capable of doing during this role of the division as they were progressing and heading down towards Baghdad. Now that they were very, very successful throughout those first couple of days. And let me do a real quick recap of my scenario as we were down there. Now, remember, we talked about how the division was using artillery to provide the support and everything for the Marines that were going across that border. And for us, it was I want to say exciting time, but it was something that we did not know what we were going to be doing or the feelings that we were going to have, knowing now that when we were shooting the rounds downrange, we were actually engaging other human beings downrange, and that was our mission, to ensure that we were securing the infantry that was in front of us, to ensure that their mission was going to be more successful with little to no casualties for them, to ensure that they were successful. So now that our RCT-1 and Recon Battalion were going through, this meant more missions for us, because me, as being attached with the 11th Marines in Romeo Battery 511, we were attached to RCT-1. This was our time for us to move and leapfrog with them to ensure that we were continuing to be able to provide the fire support and everything else that they needed now that they were moving. Now, remember, like they talked about here last week, the division was moving very, very fast. They were getting the mission accomplished faster than they expected to be able to actually make their way all the way up into Baghdad. And as we're going to see here in these next couple of chapters, we're going to see how we as the 11th Marines were moving so fast that the supply trains were having a very hard time keeping up with us to provide us with food, with water, and most importantly, with ammunition that we needed to support the infantry. So eventually we had to kind of slow down to allow them to catch up to us and to ensure that they were going to be able to provide the support that we were going to need in order to be successful in the mission that we were about to engage in. So let's go ahead and take a look at Recon Battalion and RCT 1. 1st Reconnaissance Battalion followed RCT 5 through the breach lanes in the west flank with the mission of screening the division's northern flank once west of the RCT 5's zone. Once across the border, Lieutenant Colonel Fernando and Recon's Battalion Godfather linked up with Lieutenant Colonel Daffy White and 1st LAR Battalion, they were also known as Highlander, who were screening the western flank of the division. The two commanders coordinated 1st Reconnaissance Battalion's continued movement into the screen of the division's northern flank and eventually western route of the march forward on Nazaria. The LAR Battalion guided Recon Battalion through their zone to the release point. Recon Battalion then moved up to the Saddam River, where they began to establish screen of the north side, slowly expanding to the west. Colonel Joe Downey, RCT-1 was referred to as Incheon, recalled its service of the strategic victory of the Korean War. Built around the 1st Marine Regiment, it had nearly 5,500 Marines and 1,000 vehicles when it crossed into Iraq on March 21st. Among the units of the task force were two mechanized battalions, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, Regiment 1-4, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, and 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, or 3-1, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Lou Carparota. The 3rd Battalion, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marine Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Cooper, was motorized. In addition, the RCT attached 2nd LAR Battalion, commanded by Desert Storm Navy Crosswinder Lieutenant Colonel Ed Ray, and elements of both 2nd and 3rd Assault Amphibious Battalions, Alpha Company 1st Tank Battalion, which was commanded by Captain David Banning, attached to RCT-7 on 23 March and remained with RCT-1 through the end of the war. The 1st Battalion, 11th Marines, Regiment 111, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Seaton, would provide direct support artillery files. Also supporting the RCT were Marines and sailors from Combat Service Support Company, CSSC 111, under the command of Captain Grant Schorbernick. Rounding out organization for combats were detachments from Charlie Company, 2nd Combat Engineer Battalion, 1st Intelligence Battalion, 2nd Radio Battalion, both 3rd and 4th Civil Affairs Groups, or GAG, and elements of 305th PSYOPS Company from the United States Army. RCT-1 received its orders to move out of LSA-1 and to RCT-DAs the same time as the rest of the division. The RCT-1 task organization had come together thanks to tremendous efforts of 3rd AA Battalion, getting the last two companies of Amtrak off their late arriving ships and moving them to the LSA for RCT-1. The on-the-fly nature of the assemblance of RCT-1 included several of their significant attachments arriving at the last minute. Fortunately, the regiment had the opportunity to work with some of these attachments on board the ships of the ATF West as they sailed to theater from California. The others, however, like their air support liaison team, the ASLT, joined just prior to moving to the dispersal area. CSS-11 was forming and receiving equipment at the same time as RCT-1 and did not join the RCT until the day prior to their move to the dispersal area. Not having time to train together, the first refueling operations and resupply efforts were understandably less efficient than they were desired. All of these growing pains were quickly rectified because of the professionalism and diligence of the Marines. The RCT-1 casualties evacuation and C-2 helicopters from the Purple Foxes of HHM 364 met the RCT at the DAs, and immediately a bond was formed. The bond with the casualty evacuation crews was particularly strong, and over the course of the operation, not one injured Marine from RCT-1 died during evacuation to a care facility. On many occasions, the corpsman had not even completely prepared wounded Marines for transport before the helicopter was ready in the landing zone. The superb commitment of these third MAW aviators, or RCT-1, was very appreciated and formed a bond that held through all the challenges that were going to lie ahead. RCT-1 accelerated their timetable to match division scheme and maneuver changes and crossed the line of departure at night instead of a planned daylight attack. Complicating the move, several units arrived unexpectedly into RCT-1's DA and attached themselves to the regimental rear elements, illustrating that no plan, no matter how detailed or rehearsed, takes all the moving parts into account. The RCT unexpectedly gained a Marine Wing Support Squadron and headquarters of 2nd Assault Amphibious Battalion. The MWSS followed in trace of RCT-1 as they moved into Iraq and then turned northwest up Highway 8 to establish a FARP. The 2nd AA Battalion headquarters was a godsend, as they brought significant maintenance capabilities with them. RCT-1 was to lean on 2nd AA battalions to produce maintenance miracles after a miracle on a long march to Baghdad. RCT-1 was now an organization with enough vehicles to stretch over 40 kilometers as they crossed into Iraq on the division's west flank and moved up to Highway 8. RCT-1 knew it had to uncover ground quickly to allow the rest of the 1st Marine Division and the UK Division to uncoil and present a less lucrative chemical target to the enemy. RCT-1 moved quickly to carry out this mission. Early on 21 March, RCT-1 reached their limits of advance just to the west of Jaleba Airfield, prepared to continue their attack. The Marines and their vehicles were caked in a fine layer of dust that settled in every nook and cranny during the long overland march. Drivers and small unit leaders were already finding the effects of the 2 nights without sleep. Having moved approximately 80 kilometers in the west of the division's main attack, the RCT quickly re-established multiple communication links with the division headquarters. Because of their movement had been so rapid, RCT-1 found itself in a position waiting to conduct the FPLL with the TF Tarawa before the unit had even arrived in the battle space. RCT-1 would have to wait and send patrols back to the east in order to ensure the area was sanitized of the enemy. So as you can see, they were talking about that RCT-1 had finally let their lack of sleep catch up to them. Now, for me, once we crossed that border into Iraq after our fire mission that night before into Iraq to Safwan Hill, we moved. That night we shot, and then we started moving. Now, when they're talking about that, the division was dealing with 2 nights of not sleeping, they're not exaggerating, because we did not sleep for 2 days. We continued to shoot our missions and making sure that we were supporting those units that were in front of us. And because we were moving so fast, it didn't allow us to stop. We had to continue to move. Now, I got to say that with everything that was going on, with everything that was unknown to all of us, most definitely the adrenaline was very, very up. And because of that, we did not really feel tired from everything that we were doing. But it wasn't until that 3rd day that we were actually moving and everything kind of slowed down a little bit, that all that lack of sleep finally started catching up to us. And that's when we had to send patrols out and put a lot of overwatch up, and all of us started taking turns, taking an hour or 2 to catch up on our sleep and everything as best as we could. But of course, when you lose your sleep, you're not going to catch up to it. So as we can see, the division is moving very, very fast. And that, by all means, yes, definitely did it catch the enemy by surprise? Oh, heck yeah. It definitely did, because we had so many people, as we talked about last week, as the division was moving forward, we continued to find more and more military uniforms that were thrown into fighting holes with weapons thrown in there RPGs, all kinds of stuff just everywhere because they just threw them down and ran away and changed over into regular civilian attire, which began the struggle that was to follow for the next many years for the division as they continue to clear out Iraq of the regime of Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda and all those individuals that continue to want to fight to not allow the people there to be having their own government or anything like that. So just a short synopsis of what occurred that day. And we're also going to take a look at next week about what other division actions occurred during that time frame. So what was the other units doing as the RCT was moving forward and establishing a perimeter and a actual firing position for the 11th Marines as they made their way down into Baghdad. Hero highlight. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Jeremiah McCarthy, United States Marine Corps. Medal of Honor citation. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Jeremiah McCarthy, who earned the Medal of Honor for gallantry in action while commanding a rifle company on Iwo Jima, died 15 June 1996 in Palm Beach, Florida. Lieutenant Colonel McCarthy was born in Chicago, Illinois, 10 August 1911. He first enlisted into the Marine Corps on 20 February 1937 in Chicago and served for 4 years. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, he re-enlisted and returned to active duty in February of 1942. In June of that year, he was discharged with the rank of First Sergeant in order to accept a commission in the Marine Corps Reserve. He joined the 4th Marine Division shortly thereafter and went overseas in January of 1944. Overseas, he took part in the Roy Namur Saipan Tinan and Iwo Jima campaigns. For heroism as a rifle company commander on Saipan in 1944, he was awarded the Silver Star Medal. The Purple Heart with Gold Star was awarded him for wounds received on Saipan and Iwo Jima. On 21 February 1945, as a captain, he earned the Medal of Honor on Iwo Jima, while leading an assault team across exposed ground to wipe out positions holding up the advance of his company. The medal was presented to him by President Harry S. Truman in ceremonies at the White House 5 October 1945. Released from active duty following the war, he held the grade of Lieutenant Colonel in the Marine Corps Reserve. The quarterdeck. So now that we see that RCT-5 is handling business as they make their way down into Iraq, now that's very important to me because we were attached to RCT-5 as we made our way across the border and headed down there towards Baghdad. So everything that we talked about today, it's very, very relevant to everything that we did as we progressed through there. And, as we talked about last week, that the division was finding so many uniforms just thrown away with their weapons because a lot of the soldiers in the Iraqi army just didn't want to fight. They did not want to fight against the 1st Marine Division as they were coming through. Because, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, we conducted so many training exercises across the border from Iraq, and they were hearing the explosions and the destructions that we as artillery were continuing to fight every single day to ensure that we trained to make sure that we were going to be accurate once we were actually engaging them, once we were prepared to go across the border. So that alone gave us the upper hand because psychologically they were already defeated before the division even went across the border and headed into Iraq. And this is what RCT-5 is continuing to do. They're continuing to overtake the enemy as they make their way down into Baghdad. So it's a success for the division as they continue to do what we have to do to make sure that we're going to be successful in our mission as we make our way across all the way into Baghdad. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Jeremiah McCarthy of the United States Marine Corps, this week's hero highlights that we talked about of him earning that Medal of Honor citation just again goes to show how leadership can make an effect on units, on those young Marines. Him as a leader led his men to ensure that they were successful and led by the front. He wasn't in the rear or anything like that. So he wanted to make sure that his Marines knew that he was there with him to help them to accomplish the mission. So that is very, very important. That is one of the better citations that we have read so far, because it just shows that the higher leadership is more than capable of setting such a great example. Now, let's not forget that now, man, we are, 16 days from Christmas. So let's not forget the meaning of Christmas. Take care of each other. Reach out to those service members, those veterans that may need help that are out there, that they may just need you to give them a hello, hey, how are you doing? Or even a 3-second phone call that can make a great difference for them. So let's not forget about them. Let's not forget about all those that are deployed and that they're not close to their families on this Christmas and New Year holiday, which are one of the bigger ones throughout the year. So let's make sure that we take them into account and take care of each other, take care of our families. And we will see you guys here next year, because we are not going to have a podcast until January. So until then, from all of us here in the Science household, this is Miguel, the Gunny Signs, sounding Liberty Call.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.